Hello, this time around I wanted to try something a little bit different, and what I've got here is a hand-built replica of a Mark I Tonebender, which was originally made by the Sola Sound company of London, which first appeared in 1965. And I thought I'd film the process of how I put the pedal together and how I made the enclosure and all the rest of it, and then let you see how that's done. Unfortunately, I can't really teach you anything about electronics if you're just a beginner, but if you are interested, then have a look, because it's you may find the process interesting. And then when that's done, we'll plug it in and I'll demonstrate the pedal and you can have a listen and see what you think. Well, the first thing you're going to need if you're going to build a fuzz box is you need to get some information about the circuit. And of course, as you know, there's a load of stuff out there online on the internet, so just use your search engine. And I've printed off a few things here. Here's some schematic diagrams, some circuit layouts. It's best to try and get hold of as much stuff as you can, and then you can begin the process of building the pedal. And this is the layout I'm going to use for the Sola Sound Tonebender Mark I. There's another diagram there of the same pedal. So that's what you need to do, get some information, and then you can move on to the next stage. Now then, this is the hardest part. This is getting all the various components together that you're going to need to build the pedal. And what I've decided to do is try and use some old-fashioned style components, like these big yellow capacitors and these slightly larger carbon comp resistors, which were used back in the 60s. You can still get them quite easily, but just for a bit of mojo, just to try and make the thing look and sound authentic, I've gone for older parts. And of course, it's important for this particular project to have germanium transistors, and there's some OC75s. And I'm using AC125s in the second and third position for the transistors. And also we need an enclosure. I picked a nice big metal enclosure to make it look a little bit like an old vintage box. What else we got? There's some pots there for the volume and the fuzz controls, some chicken head knobs to make it look nice and old. And finally I'm going to be using this plain board, which is not Vera board, it's just a plastic board with holes drilled straight in. And what happens is you push the components through the holes and you wire the whole thing point to point. So there's no printed circuit board on this project, just to try and make the thing, as I said, look like an old vintage pedal. So the next thing to do is to put everything together and start soldering. So this is how this type of construction works when you're making this kind of circuit. I've cut a small piece of this perforated board, which is just plain. As I said, these components are going to be point to point wired. Now I've slotted the first two through these holes, and you see that the wires out the back. I'm now going to make the first connection by just twisting these together, and now I'm going to solder it. So there you go, first two components point to point wired. I'm now going to continue. I'm going to slot a few more in, solder them up, and I'll let you see how I get on with that. So now all the resistors and the capacitors are in place and they've been soldered in. You can see around the back how all the wires have been attached. Looks a little bit messy, but it's a good construction technique. I quite like using this method, actually, point to point. There's one small departure from the original, and that is I've replaced an 8.2k resistor with this 10k trim pot, which acts as a variable resistor. And the reason for that is anybody who's ever made a Mark I Tonebender might tell you that this is a very difficult circuit to bias. So once the thing's all ready, I'll show you how you use that to bias the circuit, and you'll see how important that little thing is. So a bit more about that later. But now we're going to look at putting in the 3 transistors, which is another important part of the circuit. Because the Tonebender uses old-fashioned style germanium transistors, we need to select a trio that are going to work well within the pedal. You need to look out for the gain level and also for the amount of leakage. And I'm doing it the easy way. I've got this device here called a component analyzer. I've hooked up an OC75 to these 3 colour coded things, I'm going to press the button and we'll see that it analyses, gives us some information. It tells, first of all, it's a PNP germanium. It tells you the pin out so you can be sure that you soldered the transistor in correctly. The current gain, this particular one is 69, and importantly leakage, 38 milliamps of leakage, which isn't actually too bad, so that means that this OC75 could be usable in the circuit. And I'm going to test a few more and then we'll know that we've got 3 that'll do the job properly, and you'll definitely hear the difference at the end when we finally test the pedal. There you go then, the 3 transistors are now soldered into the circuit, which means that the board itself is pretty much complete. And we can move on now to the next stage, which is to get the enclosure and to drill some holes into it. This is how it looks, the enclosure. It's an aluminium one with this metal base plate which screws on at the bottom. And as you can see, I've marked it up. I'm going to drill some small pilot holes and then I'm going to enlarge those holes, and then we'll have a nice pedal shaped box to put the circuit board into. The case now has all the holes drilled to the correct size, and I've already been outside and sprayed a couple of coats of grey primer onto this metal, which is what you need to undercoat the enclosure. And we're going to go back downstairs now that that's dry and spray some nice attractive gold paint, and then it'll start to look a bit more like a pedal.